Eastern Europe, a region in the world known for its depressing gray, dystopian-looking commie blocks that are one earthquake away from completely collapsing, unprecedented levels of alcoholism, and food blandered an entire discography of Imagine Dragons. Indeed, it is a region that people dismiss as fundamentally broken and not worthy of visiting at all, where Sauron wouldn't even dare to step one foot in with his army of orcs. However, beneath the surface, Eastern Europe is rich with culture, century-spanning history, and some of the most fun people walking this earth. But today, we won't be talking about that. No. Today, we'll be talking about why Eastern Europeans hate each other. If you thought that the Balkans were a shitstorm of ethnic hatred, Eastern Europe as a whole makes the conflicts over there seem like nothing more than kindergarten spats. And in this video, we'll be discussing why Eastern European countries hate each other. Now, before I start, if you're a person that likes to play with Wojaks, dress them up in different outfits, give them different haircuts, create your own trad cat wife and place them with a Wojak of your own, and think that there is such a thing as Central Europe, I suggest you click right off this video. Because if you're a distinguished academic gentleman, you'll know that everything east of Vienna, it's Eastern Europe. And no, Czechs, you're not beating the accusations this time. You see this little piece of land right here? East of Vienna. Therefore, Eastern Europe. So without further ado, let's begin. In a previous video, we've talked about why Poland and Russia hate each other. And although the two countries are waiting for nuclear fallout to hit each other as nations, that doesn't mean that other Russian-hating countries are clear in the eyes of Poland. Thus, the first on this list is the relationship with Poland and Ukraine. Up until recently, the two didn't have the warmest relationships with one another, as for centuries the two have garnered beef against each other. And no, I'm not just talking about Tartar. Ever since the early medieval ages, with the establishment of the Kievan Rus and the First Polish Kingdom, the two countries have been at odds with each other, chucking spears at one another in the forests of the great European plain and yelling kurwa at one another. This rivalry continued over the centuries as Poland grew in size and took control of more and more of Eastern European lands via the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Under it, although it was relatively more tolerant than other empires in the same time period, persecution of ethnic minorities still persisted. Throughout its existence, programs of Polonization and forced conversion to Catholicism were present throughout the entirety of the Polish-Lithuanian realm. As you can imagine, the minority Orthodox Ukrainians and other Slavs didn't really appreciate having to use a language that didn't have consonants in its language and having to praise some guy with a tall hat that lived all the way in Rome. As such, the Ukrainians more often than not were quite skeptical of the Poles, and much like Mel Gibson in Braveheart, yearned for freedom. This made them rebellious little subjects that every now and then would break off from the great Polish state and create their own state with blackjack and hookers, known as the Cossack Hetmanate, and then go to town raiding Polish villages and settlements while seeking stronger allies amongst the Ottomans, Russians, and whoever showed up that was strong enough to beat up Poland. Albeit, a lot of times they'd also ally with Poland to stick it to the Russians, the Ottomans, and also those horsemen riding f***s in the east that were invading them. But really, I don't really have the energy nor nerves to cover this topic sometimes, so watch for it in another video, okay? In more recent history, the two's relationship deteriorated further when Ukraine sort of decided to side with a funny mustache man and create their own independent state away from Russia. In this endeavor, they kicked out and killed many Poles in western Ukraine, which was historically Polish territory and had a large Polish population, most notably in the city of Lviv. Hence, the Poles really hated the Ukrainians as guts for a while. Following the end of World War II, the Ruskies came back to control of Ukraine, and the Poles that remained in the country were subject again to programs of forced Russification and forced Ukrainianization, which really made the two despise each other. And up until the early 2000s, this remained a hot point of contention between the two. In more recent times, since Russia's full-out war against Ukraine, the two countries have made tremendous amends with one another, as they both see Russia as the common enemy and a greater threat than either one would be to one another. Poland has given Ukraine significant armaments and supplies in the fight against Russian aggression, whilst at the same time the country has hosted millions of Ukrainian refugees, which as a result made the relationship between the two much better, making the two nations finally friends after hundreds of years of hatred. But you know what would have made their relationship even better? If they gifted each other a extra wallet, baby! Now, you might think that healthier relationships, financial security, and spiritual fulfillment might be the most important things in life. But you'd be extremely wrong. The truth is, not having a bulky wallet and having your credit card secure trumps all that. You really think you could achieve any of that by pulling out that crusty wallet you've been carrying around for 6 years at a date? You really think any woman would love you? And that's where Exter comes in. Exter's Parliament wallet is made of some of the most premium leather and has the slickest design on the market. It allows you to hold up to 12 cards and cash in it. It severely lowers the bulk in your pocket in a stylish way, and best of all, it has a color no matter what your style is. And on top of that, it has RFID protection, so that those pesky cyber criminals cannot get a hold of your card's data while just tapping your pocket. Which is absolutely perfect if you're traveling somewhere where, it doesn't have the best of reputations. If you've ascended to a whole other plane of cashless existence, Exter has you covered with the Card Holder Pro. This bad boy can hold up to 14 cards and has a variety of gadgets that can be attached onto it, like the Card Finder, which can help find your cards no matter where they might be hiding in your apartment, or if God forbid your card holder gets stolen. No problem! The Card Finder can help track where your card holder is anywhere in the world with just the use of a single app. It has 3 hours of solar charge, which can last up to 2 months when fully charged, can be rang by your phone or wallet, and can be voice activated by either Alexa, Siri, or Google. And best of all, Exter has a lifetime warranty. So don't waste any time and go and click my link in the description using code EUROPE during their anniversary sale, where you can get prices up to 40% off, plus an additional discount with my code, via which you just save more money and you can get an amazing gift for yourself or your loved one. So what are you waiting for? Just go and click the link! Sticking in the region, we also have the relationship between the Poles and Lithuanians. Most of us see the two as a historical power couple that bashed in the heads of Russians, Germans, and Turks alike. However, just as my parents' marriage seemed perfect on the outside, on the inside, my father was a domestic abuser. Bruh. As such, the spat between the two came about with the unification of the two countries into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Initially, the Lithuanians were the ones who were dominating the union. However, as any man that's ever dated a Slavic woman should know, although initially you are the macho man of the relationship, after some time you'll be relegated to a submissive bitch that's only worthy of coughing up his wallet to buy her the latest Balenciaga handbag. The same could be said about the Commonwealth, as Poland over time became the more dominant one and the leader of the union. Under them, the Polish language and culture became the favored one and even adopted by the Lithuanian nobility. Paired with the Polonization of non-Catholic Slavs, many Lithuanians felt they were next on the chopping block, as the Poles increasingly started dominating their realm. After the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was disintegrated into nothingness and wiped off the map, the two came under rule of the Russians. As you should know by now, the Ruskies didn't really treat their minority subjects with much respect, and the two wished to eventually secede from the Russian state. The Poles, as a result, constantly rebelled against the Russians and sought refuge and help from the Lithuanians in this endeavor. However, although the Lithuanians wished to help, many were still very skeptical of the Poles because of their previous cultural and linguistic domination in the kingdom. As such, the Russians saw this and encouraged the Lithuanians more and more to off from the Poles, essentially leaving the Poles to fend off the Ruskies on their own, which, as you can imagine, definitely spiced up the relation between the two. After World War I, the Poles and Lithuanians finally achieved independence. Immediately upon this, the Poles wished to yet again unify with the Lithuanians into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. However, the Lithuanians, seeing this request, just left them unseen. Then further tensions escalated when Poland seized Vilnius, Lithuania's historical capital, taking it for themselves and refusing to give it back to the Lithuanians, which just further flamed the fire that was started between the two, and the two countries basically broke off all diplomatic relations. Then after World War II, they then again found themselves under the Russians in the USSR. And instead of being at each other's throats, they decided, you know what we did to each other, nowhere near as bad as what the Russians are doing to us. So, be friends again? Maybe. And they became friends. However, after the fall of the USSR, when Poland and Lithuania yet again achieved independence, tensions rose up again because of everyone's favorite, minority rights.
Oh, hell no! Hell no! Whoa!
The two countries started having diplomatic spats as Lithuania hosts a sizable Polish minority, roughly 6% of its entire population. As such, the Poles within Lithuania and outside claimed that they were discriminated against and facing repression of their language and culture. In the early days of the newly formed Lithuanian Republic, Lithuania imposed restrictions on Polish language schools and also implemented a series of laws regarding Polish language when it's written on national documents. The law required that the Poles spell their name in the Lithuanian spelling, despite both utilizing the Latin alphabet. However, after both countries joined the EU, this issue has died down significantly, and the relations between the two have been as friendly as they have ever been. Most of the historic tension that existed only remains amongst high nationalist circles, and the Poles and Lithuanians are, well, generally allies. Yay! Friendship! Going further down, we have the relationship between Romania and Ukraine. Now, unlike Poland and Ukraine, the beef between these two countries is much more recent, coming about roughly around the time of World War II. The beginning of the conflict between the two countries started with the Soviet annexation of North Bukovina and Bessarabia, two historically Romanian provinces which were allocated to Ukraine. As is the story with any ethnic minority in the Soviet Union, the Romanians annexed within these territories became forced subjects of Russification and Ukrainianization programs. The annexation sparked the beginning of the conflict between the two, which then escalated when Romania decided to join the Axis and pull a Unocard invading Ukraine and the Soviet Union, gaining back most of its territories and then some. During the Romanian occupation of Ukrainian Transnistria, the Ukrainians living in the territories were subject to ethnic cleansing and massacres committed by the Romanians, which, as you can imagine, definitely wouldn't do any favors in making a country like you. So, yeah. After the Axis' defeat, the territories that were gained back by Romania were given back again to the Soviet Union, and the status quo of repressing Romanians continued. For decades, the relationship between the two was icy because of this, but it didn't really escalate further. However, after the USSR was dissolved and Ukraine gained independence, the two countries started beefing yet again. First and foremost, the Romanians persisted that North Bukovina and Bessarabia were rightful Romanian land. And now that the USSR was out of the picture, these lands should be returned to their rightful owners. The Ukrainians, as you can imagine, completely dismissed any notion of territorial exchanges, which enraged the Romanians further, who saw these annexations as illegal. Alongside this territorial dispute, up until 2009, the two countries also argued over who owns an uninhabited tiny-ass little island in the middle of the Black Sea. Because, this is Eastern Europe after all. For almost a decade, the two argued back and forth over this piece of land, finally bringing the issue to the International Court of Justice, which ruled that the land should go under the ownership of Ukraine. However, Romania was to gain 80% of the maritime rights of the island, which Ukrainians saw as complete and utter bullshit. Furthermore, the North Bukovina and Bessarabia situation devolved into the question of minority rights. Because of course it did. As of the most recent census, there are over 400,000 Romanians living in Ukraine. Ukraine, as of 2017, has passed a series of laws that restrict minority language education, which has encompassed schooling in the Romanian language. And the country has actively discouraged the Romanian population of achieving second citizenship from Romania, as the country has laws that don't recognize any other citizenship than Ukrainian. This has naturally increased tensions between the two countries, as Romania finds Ukraine's actions unjust and has publicly criticized the country on the issue on the international stage, alongside its best friend and greatest pal, Hungary, who also has raised concerns over the treatment of the Hungarian minority within Ukraine. Which, if you think about it, is kind of sweet that both Hungary and Romania finally found something that unifies them. So, thank you, Ukraine! Woo! As a result, the bilateral relations between the two countries have taken a plummet, becoming icy up until the, most recent Russian invasion of Ukraine. Since the invasion, Romania, similarly to Poland, has funded Ukraine extensively, giving them all sorts of armament and supplies in defending their country against Russian imperialism. Even though the two countries are at odds over their historical issues, both find Russia's actions much more threatening than, what language are you gonna speak in school? And although nationalists in both countries raised concerns over the actions of, the opposite country in the past, tensions have cooled much down since then, and the relationship between the two countries has become much friendlier due to the dire situation Ukraine finds itself in.
Here comes Daredevil.
Now, I know what you're gonna say. Janusz, Georgia isn't in Europe. Why are you listing him in this list, you scrub? And true. Absolutely true. But here's the thing. If I didn't, the entire video would be, a bunch of the same countries arguing over issues that were over hundreds and hundreds of years old. The point is, diversity is our strength. So, the next on our list are Georgia and Russia. The two countries have had a complicated, not really complicated, but an antagonistic relationship with one another since their inception. Georgia, stuck in the geographic hellhole that it is, has struggled for independence since it's known for itself. Be it fighting the invading nomads from the north, fighting the pesky Persians from the east, or fighting the troublesome Turks from the south. Since its founding, Georgia has been fighting for its survival on this grand world stage. And although they've been semi-successful at this, thanks to their god-awful geography for any would-be invaders, ultimately they were annexed by Russia in the 19th century. Much like the other minorities that found themselves in the Russian Empire, they too struggled with programs of Russification and general policies that aimed to basically wipe their culture and people off the land. And although this has been the basis for a bad relation between the two, the real issue between them started with the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, Georgia, like any good boy Western state, is a diverse country with a plethora of languages and cultures inhabiting its region. However, since the 90s, the Russians, in an effort to keep a hold over the country and their influence in the region, have propagated and supported several secessionist movements from Georgia's minorities in an effort to do exactly that. Most notably the ones living in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Since the 90s, Russia has supported and waged 4 wars against Georgia in an effort to secede these two regions from the country. In the Abkhazian War, Russia aided Abkhazian separatists to achieve independence from Georgia, in the process of which they cleansed over 250,000 Georgians from their native lands. During the same time period, they trained and armed South Ossetian separatists, who then fought a war against Georgia in 2008, where Russia also aided them by sending their own forces into the country, basically unleashing a full-out invasion against the country. In it, Russian forces bombed and attacked numerous Georgian cities and settlements, whilst helping both Abkhazia and South Ossetia from seceding from Georgian jurisdiction. Now, I know my Georgian viewers are going to be a bit mad for me using the word secede and, independence, as no one really recognizes Abkhazia or South Ossetia except for, Venezuela and, some one minor island nation in the middle of the Pacific. But as a half Serb, if I have to get over, Kosovo, have to show my ID, passport when I cross the border, so do you. I'm sorry. I don't make the rules, it's Abkhazia and Kosovo. This, as you can imagine, has caused a highly negative view of Russians in the eyes of Georgians. As such, Georgians have climbed the leaderboard of the most Russian-hating countries, joining the ranks of Estonia, Latvia, and Ukraine. Since the last war in 2008, Russia has also continuously meddled within Georgian internal affairs, supporting a variety of pro-Russian politicians and oligarchs, which have gradually turned the country more towards Russia and further away from the EU, stifling its progress in EU integrations. Although the Georgian people have continuously fought against this, protesting day and night against the decisions of their politicians and trying to escape the sphere of influence of Russia, their efforts have ultimately been for naught, as the country has slowly and surely been kind of turning towards Russia, which again is a real shame considering they got a EU candidate status, but fucking politicians, man. Furthermore, when the full-blown against Ukraine started with Russia's invasion in 2022, many Russians decided to move to Georgia in an effort to escape the draft and, be great patriots. Because of which prices in Georgia have skyrocketed because of this influx of people. As such, many native Georgians were priced out for basic goods such as food and basically apartments and real estate, which has just continually fueled this negative sentiment towards Russia and its people. Last but not least, we have the relationship that everyone and their mother knows, that of Ukraine and Russia. Despite what the most recent regional events might lead you to believe, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine stem way beyond the Russo-Ukrainian war. In reality, this conflict is only on the surface level as why the two countries hate each other. The real conflict stems much further. For starters, the two countries have a fundamental disagreement regarding the identity and the historical origins of their countries. If you're not from the region and thereby inherently not influenced by, the regional narrative, you should know that both Russia and Ukraine claim to stem from the ancient Kievan Rus, who were essentially the first state predecessors of Eastern Slavic peoples. In Western academia, the Kievan Rus are usually compared to ancient Rome, who over centuries basically founded different types of people who later on would basically diverge from Rome and found different nations such as France, Spain, Italy, and God forbid me for uttering this word, Romania. However, in the East, this is anything but the case. Both Ukraine and Russia see themselves as the successors of the Kievan Rus, whilst claiming that the others are backwards barbarians who have absolutely nothing to do with the Kievan Rus, and in fact the only thing they do have is an identity crisis. The Ukrainians argue that they are the successors of the Kievan Rus because Kiev was the state's capital, and the lands within the Kievan Rus that were the most developed were that of modern-day Ukraine. While Kiev was a prosperous medieval metropolis on par with London at the time, Russia was nothing more than a conglomeration of loose Slavic tribes that basically wallowed in their own feces and shitty little villages. While Moscow, the capital of Russia, was nothing more than an insignificant little backwards village in the depths of the forests of the Eurasian plain. At the same time, Ukrainian nationalists argue that Russia finds its origin only in the 1500s, while beforehand, their original state was Muscovy, who was more founded by Central Asian hordes, greatly influenced by them, and thereby they have nothing to do with the Kievan Rus. Russia, on the other hand, completely disputes this and claims that they, in fact, are the rightful heirs of the Kievan Rus, and that they and the Ukrainians were the same people. However, at one point they split off from the motherland and became influenced by other people such as the Poles, which muddied their connection with the motherland of Russia. According to them, Ukrainians deny the fact that they are Russians, and in fact they have a severe identity crisis. Their state is fake and only invented by Lenin, and throughout history they would refer to them as Little Russians. Alongside this, many also think that the two countries should be unified into one because they see them as the same people, and that the Ukrainians are just in denial of that. The conflict emerged around the 17th century when the Cossack Hetmanate basically seceded from Poland and was aiming to find new, stronger allies to protect its independence. In their seek of protection, they tried to find different types of countries that would basically ally with them, looking towards both the Turks, Poles, and Eastern hordes, but in the end they decided to go with Russia because they offered them the greatest deal. The Russians at the time offered the Ukrainians protection and high degrees of autonomy. However, over the years, the Russians would go back on their promises and deny them both, increasingly Russifying the country and erasing the Ukrainian identity. This trend continued more and more, and Russia seized more and more of Ukrainian lands, completely occupying and holding the country by the 19th century. At this time period, the process of Russification was at its highest, with the Ukrainian language being banned in schools and in literature, which the Ukrainians at the time and today saw as basically the erasure of the Ukrainian identity. With the establishment of the Soviet Union, these Russification processes continued. However, then in the 1930s, Ukraine experienced one of the worst famines in history, known as the Holodomor. According to general academia, the Holodomor was a man-made famine caused by the forced requisition of Ukrainian grain, which many, Ukraine included, have dubbed as a genocide. Russia, on the other hand, contests this claim and claims that it was not genocide, as the Holodomor was not intentional and the famine also affected other parts of the Soviet Union as well. While more radical views state that the Ukrainians caused the Holodomor themselves by Ukrainian farmers refusing to share grain and hoarding it for themselves. During World War II, Ukrainians dissatisfied with Russian rule strived to have an independent country. In its strife, a faction split off from Ukraine, mainly consisting of Ukrainian nationalists, who decided to ally with the Nazis in an effort to secure this. Under their rule, many atrocities and massacres were committed against Ukraine's minorities, such as Jews and Poles. As such, Russia sees this as Ukraine backstabbing them, and the creation of the modern-day Ukrainian state being rooted in fascism, even though arguably the vast majority of Ukrainians fought on the side with the USSR against Nazism. Then in the 90s, Ukraine, alongside many other Soviet republics, declared independence from the Union. Although the secession was seen as legitimate by Russia and the majority of Russians in general, many still found this as a backstab from Ukraine as well as a backstab from the other republics, seeing it as essentially an inflammatory reaction to a country that provided them with so much. However, then for a period, both countries, Ukraine and Russia, collaborated intensely in both economics and politics. However, Ukraine still refused to join any Russian-led unions, be it economic or political, in an effort to basically distance itself from Russian influence. Further tensions escalated in 2014 with the Euromaidan protests, when the people of Ukraine rose up in protest against their pro-Russian president who refused to sign a pro-EU deal. The protests got so bad that the president was forced to flee into Russia and seek refuge over there. Now, although the general consensus is that these protests were organic and led by the people for the people, in Russia the narrative is quite different. Officially, Russians believe that Euromaidan was a Western-instigated coup against Ukraine and against Russian interests. As such, in 2014, in a way to combat this, Russians decided to invade and annex Crimea and then support the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk, funding their separatists and training them and pouring large amounts of resources in them seceding from the country. As you can imagine, the relationship between the two was extremely strained by this, and it only continued to plummet in 2022 when Russia unleashed its full-scale invasion against the country. The invasion was launched under the pretense of denazifying and demilitarizing Ukraine. However, other sources indicate that the final goal was indeed to annex more territories from the country. Since the invasion, Russia has committed numerous war crimes and atrocities all throughout the invaded provinces, killing thousands of people and completely leveling several cities to the ground, which, as you can imagine, severely fueled the hate against the country. Which leads us to today, with the two countries having the worst relations they've ever had in their entire history. Now, although there are many tensions between countries in Eastern Europe still present today, most of them have basically buried the hatchet after joining the EU. However, those countries neighboring Russia still have highly negative sentiments towards the country due to the current actions of the Russian government against Ukraine as well as their own countries, with the Russians meddling within their internal affairs and generally taking negative actions against their country. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something from it. If you did, leave a comment down below, tell me exactly what you learned, and if you really enjoyed it, become a member like these wonderful people. Anyways, my name is Janos, and you watched Living Ironically in Europe.
Hey, why are you leaving?